Peace and love. Salute to everyone. Thank you all for joining today. Just waiting for a few more people to come in here. So, the topic of discussion today is the arrested development in hip hop. Or should I say, why hip hop is at a standstill. Just gonna shut this door. Why do we find that a lot of our hip hop artists and acts tend to have some sort of arrested development to a certain degree? They tend to never really exceed, get past, beyond a lot of childish topics, and the content of their music remains very immature. Their dressing, their accountability, their thought process, especially when you compare it to who a lot of them idolize or who they want to be like, right? A lot of hip hop artists look up to, if you sit any most hip hop artists down, at least, within a certain era, and even, in today's time, and you ask them to list their top 5 artists, you'll find that you'll 9 times out of 10, or maybe 8 times out of 10, you'll find that you have guys like Tupac or Biggie in their top 10, or Jay-Z or Nas, something of that sort. But if you look at Tupac and Biggie, look at pictures of Tupac and Biggie and how they dressed. For instance, you'll find Tupac or Biggie in, sometimes you find them in regular clothing, in, street clothes or what have you. But on their album covers, for instance, and especially Tupac, even on a day-to-day music videos, you see that these guys dressed up. They wore button-up shirts. And Tupac, for instance, had his, destructive moments in songs and lyrics and things like that. But even from his early records, when he made songs like Dear Mama and so on and so forth, you could hear the maturity, right? You could hear him seeking for growth, searching for growth, rather. And it's something that's very rare in today's time, in this day and age, for you to actually find artists who don't remain in a teenage state, or what I would call arrested development. Most of the content of their music remains promoting drugs, promoting violence, promoting all sorts of sexual, explicit sexual content and immorality. And the music lacks luster, right? They're not taking their time creating these projects and songs. You'll hear producers talk about, when they talk about the making of a song, you'll hear them oftentimes say things like, "Oh, I created this beat in 20 minutes or 15 minutes." Now, this is not how things were back in the days. It's not how things were back in the days. Back in the days, you would find that artists took their time, they made a connection with the producer, they worked closely with the producer to create these timeless, universal sounding records. Not saying that everyone's mute that the music is for everyone. You know, nothing will ever be for everyone. Nothing could ever be for everyone. But the songs had meaning to them. Now there are a lot of exceptions, obviously. You know, not saying that in every genre, in every era, there isn't, you know, immorality and all sorts of degradation and ridiculous behavior, right? But where's the accountability overall in hip hop and for our elder statesmen in hip hop as a whole? Because oftentimes when we talk about the damage that hip hop is doing in our community, the negativity and toxicity that our so-called artists are spewing into our community, into our ears, and to our children, there's no accountability. And oftentimes we tend to play victim and say, oh, why is hip hop the only community where this whole ageism is a thing? You know, where after a period of time, the artist is seen as not relevant, and no one wants to hear them, or they're old. Whereas in other genres, their legacy artists, you know, and legends can continue to tour and make music and get the support from their audience and fans for a long time. And I'll tell you why. I'll explain it, right? See, your audience in a lot of other genres, the topics and the context of what these artists and songwriters are making can often be, you know, very general or universal concepts, topics, or even sometimes, you know, and it could be ambiguous, right? In the sense that the writer is writing it from a perspective where, you know, it could be introspective, or it's written from a perspective where only they understand what's being said or what they're saying. And then it leaves the audience to their imagination to, over, you know, extended periods of time, even it could even run into years or decades, where the audience is constantly trying to figure out what the writer meant by what they said. But if you look at hip hop in general, you'll find that in most cases, the topics are often, you know, they remain immature for a very long period of time. And your audience, the audience that sees you growing, when they meet you, when your audience discovers you at an early age, right? They don't stop growing. They continue to go through different phases of their lives, from, let's say, high school to graduation to getting their first job to preparing for college to their internships, to getting a real career job, to preparing, dating and preparing for marriage, to marriage, and so on and so forth. And they discover you, let's say, in their teenage years. But over the period of time, you're not growing, and you're still spewing the same ideas and the same in your music and the same concepts and content from 15, 20, 30 years back. There's no growth, right? So your fan base, after a while, they grow up. They become intellects. They become thought leaders. They become influencers. They become heads of industries, family people. And you expect them to still support the same childish um, music, content, and still listen to these things. Some of them have children, and things that were okay for them to listen to by themselves in their car, riding and doing all sorts of immature stuff, will likely not be appropriate for them to listen to with their children. So a lot of our artists are not evolving, right? And yet they wonder why they don't get the same support as other genres. Like even a lot of our classic legacy acts in R&B. Same thing could apply to even R&B. There's certain records, like for instance, from Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, and some of these artists. And if you cross over and go to other genres that's not considered urban, um, talk about Pink Floyd, talk about the Beatles, you know, these were real writers, songwriters. These were real musicians. It wasn't about popularity. In this day and age, and the music industry is partly to blame for this as well, because back in the days, you didn't necessarily have to have a big following to get a record deal or to be signed to a major label. But in this day and age, the audience has to be there already, right? So the labels, the A&R people, and the labels are checking to see what you've already built. Most of the work is already done when they take over the artist and sign the artist. So there's no incentive for true creativity. And even when the artists are very talented, they could be very talented, but they're not creative. They're not original. They want to be like what's popular, what's trending, right? And trends are trends. They come and go. But to be a legacy artist, to make something that will impact history, that will stick around and impact generations, you have to dig deeper into your creativity. It's not about the trends and wanting to be like who's currently popular or who's famous today. It has to be more introspective. You have to not care so much about the virality of the content or how people receive it. It has to be true emotions and true expressions. That's what art is, right? And if you look at a lot of people, a lot of guys like or artists, who are still around today and who are still appreciated and recognized for their contribution, their great contribution to music. For instance, guys like Nas, let's say. He's often accused of, not having the right beat pick, beats track selection, right? They say, oh, sometimes Nas's tracks lackluster. But art is subjective, and you can't really tell an artist, you know, that they should have used green or blue, green instead of blue. So it's not the same thing as spewing and creating all toxic messages, right? It's not the same thing as that. We're talking about the canvas, the brush, the colors that they choose, right? But in context of the content of it, if you're an artist, yes, you're at liberty to paint and create whatever it is that you want to paint and create. But if you paint a picture of, let's say, a nude woman, right? That it's art, and you'll find people who appreciate that art, but that piece of work cannot be presented in the setting of let's say a high school exhibition, right? A display, art exhibition in a high school. It's not appropriate. So it's not so the context of that, of saying art should be subjective and artists should be free to create whatever they want to create. It's true. They should be. But don't be mad when you don't get that support, or when your work doesn't have the staying power over decades, over generations, and you're unable to work continuously, to tour continuously, because you haven't grown, you haven't shown growth. And you can't tell me that, like, take for instance Lauryn Hill, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. What a beautiful album. What a classic album. One of the greatest to ever do it, right? And she hasn't really released any new body of work. But that album, you could turn on that album today and still listen to it from start to finish. Not saying that you may not skip every song on there is for everyone. That's not the point. But the album is very cohesive. It's introspective. It's well put together. You can tell, that there's intent and there's meaning behind it. So let's encourage our young artists to work on being on their creativity, right? And not be so concerned and worried about what the audience thinks and what the labels think, and what the A&R people think, and wanting to get signed or wanting to be popular immediately and viral. Take the time, hone in, work on your skills, develop your chops, and make a meaningful contribution to society. And specifically, this message refers to goes out specifically to the hip hop community. And that's what I wanted to come on here and discuss today. So let's be more mindful of our contributions. Salute.